This is Michelle Lay, Vice President of International and Continuing Education Programs at the Fund for American Studies. I participated in 2 TFAS programs, in Washington, D.C. and in Prague. You're listening to the Liberty and Leadership Podcast.
Hello and welcome. I'm Roger Ream, and this is the Liberty and Leadership Podcast, a conversation with TFAS alumni who are making a real impact in politics, public policy, government, business, philanthropy, law, and the media. Today, I'm excited to be joined by Sandy Malone. Sandy has followed a unique path since her time with TFAS as the creator and owner of a prominent wedding planning company. Sandy and her team starred on Wedding Island, a TLC-produced reality show about the everyday tasks and troubles involved with running a wedding planning business on the island of Vieques. Sandy currently reports for the Police Tribune, a news organization dedicated to sharing stories that are not biased against law enforcement officers. Sandy has a long history of advocacy for law enforcement, personnel, and public safety. While living and operating a business on the island of Vieques, Puerto Rico, Sandy led a nonprofit, Vieques Against Crime, dedicated to reducing crime and increasing communication and collaboration between civilians and law enforcement agencies. Sandy is a model example of a well-rounded career that an experience with TFAS leads to, and I'm excited to discuss the lessons she's learned on liberty and leadership throughout her career. Sandy, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for inviting me to participate.
Well, I'm looking forward to this because a conversation with you I know will be fun. Whenever you come back to TFAS for programs, you always bring so much energy and passion into the room. And I'm sure it'll be demonstrated today as we talk a little bit about your successful career and your life since TFAS.
Well, everything that happened in my career was a result of my opportunities that I had from being a part of the Fund for American Studies and specifically the Institute on Political Journalism. Because I graduated from Ohio State and I actually did the program immediately after I graduated. And I learned amazing things. Like I learned about the balance of trade and things that were never really discussed in the economics courses that I took as an undergraduate. But then I got an amazing perspective from Dr. High, and my friends and I still quote things that he taught us in class because I'm still friends with the girls that I roomed with. And we were at Georgetown back then, but I'm still good friends. And 3 of the 4 of us went into journalism and 1 went on to get a law degree. So it was, it's really an amazing thing. But the Fund for American Studies got me an internship at Campaigns and Elections magazine, which has since been bought by Congressional Quarterly. But at the time, it was really amazing. And I got hired as the associate editor before I was even out of the program. And then became managing editor there before the 1996 election cycle, which was less than a year out of college. Was amazing. I got to go to all the conventions and do all sorts of stuff that I'm sitting there going, you guys know I'm 22 and you're asking my opinion, right? And at least I knew what to say because I had learned a lot of that from the programs and the experiences that we had at IPJ and all the neat people that we got to interact with. We had classes with Coleman McCarthy. I mean, who can say that?
Well, that's great. I'm glad it had such a great influence on you and you still remember the economics you learned. Most journalism majors, of course, don't get any economics when they go through school. And so we want to make sure all our journalism students have at least one course in economics. And Professor Jack High is a friend as well as a professor we've enjoyed having teach for us here at Georgetown when we were there, as well as at our program in Prague. The international students loved him as well. So
he's really a lot of fun.
Yeah, I think
he makes econ fun.
Yeah,
so,
good.
He
loves class participation too, and letting students, get into it.
Well, my first job after Campaigns and Elections magazine was as a political reporter for the Wall Street Journal Interactive Edition, which had launched only recently at that point. And there were a lot of things that I wrote about that if I hadn't had Dr. High putting us sort of in the right direction of how to read things and know what I was reading, I would have been in a lot more trouble. But, it was really, I actually learned things. I still quote things from the ethics class. And it's come full circle because I was in journalism and then in government affairs and public relations and then wedding planning for 11 years. And now I'm back. I'm managing editor of the Police Tribune. It's the nation's largest police publication. And my husband is a police captain, retired. So that's where that sort of initiated my interest. But all of these things still tie into all the principles that the Fund for American Studies is teaching. And we enjoy reading all the updates and seeing what's going on with the programs. You guys grow every year.
Well, you provide updates too, which we appreciate. Well, I'd like to talk to you about all those things, both the work on the Police Tribune, your work in the wedding planning business, because you've been an entrepreneur, and we're going to have several of our TFAS alums as guests in the coming weeks who are true entrepreneurs like yourself, and I think that's exciting. One more question about your TFAS experience. You said you keep up with others who did the program with you. You
Yeah.
had a great internship. You enjoyed the classes.
Yes.
That's really, we say live, learn, and intern. You covered all three bases there
100%.
of living with students you keep in touch with today, interning in an internship that hired you, which is not always, that doesn't happen to every student.
Nope.
That's great. And then and to learn in the class that Professor High taught, and no doubt the other classes. That's wonderful. So it did the same thing for me when I was a student a few years ahead of you. So
Not that
that's
many.
no. Well, uh, so you you got a taste of journalism. I remember actually seeing your first byline piece in the Wall Street Journal when you worked there. That was exciting for us. We now have, I think you were probably the first graduate of our program who worked at the Wall Street Journal, but
Huh?
I think we now have 7 or 8 who work there today.
Yeah.
Some on the editorial side of
I
things,
get all excited
and
when
on
I
the
see
reporting
that.
side. Yeah, yeah. But tell me about how do you end up in Puerto Rico?
It was such a fabulous experience because we were from there and, being in this area. And then I worked in okay, I went to the Wall Street Journal and it was a lot of fun. But it was, first off, I had to live in Manhattan for a few years and I just wasn't a Manhattan person. I did it, but then I got an offer from Creative Response Concepts through
Oh,
Mike
sure.
Thompson.
Yes.
And the connection was made. By the way, when I was at the Wall Street Journal, John Fund used to take me out to lunch all the time. He was this humongous person on the editorial board. He was famous. He was on TV all the time. And he knew I was an alumni, and he would pop in and check on me and take me to lunch. These are the kinds of things that Fund alumni do when they know that people, interns, younger, new hires are coming in. And it's something that I've never seen from any other organization, to be really honest. So anyway, I'd been up there, and I think John may have told me to talk with Creative Response Concepts. I know CRC and the Fund for American Studies were involved, but the next thing you know, I had an awesome job offer, and I moved back, and worked for that crew and with lots of alumni, and it was an amazing experience. And I was one of the lead media strategists to help kick the Navy off of Vieques Island because the government of Puerto Rico was a client, and they accidentally blew up a civilian security guard. And instead of saying no more bombing on Vieques, they just said we want the Navy off the island entirely. And we worked for the government of Puerto Rico, and I got to spend months flying in and taking reporters on tours of the live fire zone and to the military base and explaining why things were the way they were, and fell in love with the place. But when the government of Puerto Rico switches governors, it's like up here. When the Republican loses, there was effectively a Republican governor down there. When they lost, the Sila Calderon, who was the mayor of San Juan, became governor of Puerto Rico. They fired all the consultants and hired all the others.
Yeah.
So I kept going back to Vieques because I loved it. And it was beautiful. And I had all these friends in the Puerto Rico government that we would go see in San Juan, and bought a vacation home there and got married there. And my husband was eligible to retire after 30 years with Metro Transit. He was a SWAT commander, and times were changing. And I had the opportunity, and there was no wedding planner on Vieques. I'd planned my wedding down there, and I said, let's do it. And we said 2 weddings a year would be, 2 weddings a month would be a successful bar for the first couple of years.
Yeah.
And by August of the first year in business, we had 19 weddings in August. And we were just going, oh my God, what have we done to
That's
ourselves?
incredible.
Yeah.
19 in 1 month.
Some of them were elopements, but that still was a couple days of picking them up at the airport, getting them checked
Sure.
in, doing the marriage licenses, usually simultaneously while you had groups on the island, because no wedding was one day. People would arrive on Wednesday and have welcome parties and beach
Yeah.
parties, and we did all of this. And a friend of mine was a TV producer, or my friend's husband was a TV producer. And we would tell these ridiculous stories. And he'd be like, that can't really happen. We're like, oh, it happens. It happens every time. You don't even have to try. It's just a matter of like, what will go wrong? Will it be something on the wedding planning side that goes wrong? Or will it be like the wedding guest who drinks till they have to go to the emergency room? You don't know what's going to happen. And so they came down and filmed a demo, and we were offered a bunch of different opportunities, and we went with TLC. Our production crew was 495 Productions, and they had just finished filming Jersey Shore. So it wasn't exactly the experience. We were an established business. They came down. It was rough. I mean, we had 70 people for a 5-person staff filming us. Sandy Cam for 70 days. It was horrible. But we did one season. We survived it. They were real clients except for 2, like the 12 weddings we filmed. And it isn't realistic to do that to real clients.
Yeah, but the clients agreed to be filmed.
Oh, they all agreed, and
Yeah.
they all got some form of incentive to agree,
Right,
since they were already clients. Some of them, they picked up the tab for the flowers or airfare or whatever they paid. Everybody got some incentive to
including
agree to
15
allow.
minutes of fame, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And some of them I think really enjoyed it, and some of them probably regretted it. And I think that's probably how everybody feels who does reality TV. But it didn't. It's interesting. I want to make a point. And I've told a couple of people this that have come to me that had businesses, that had opportunities. You don't necessarily grow your business or make any more money by being on a reality show. And it's not because the show didn't make my business look bad. I mean, we made beautiful weddings happen under really difficult circumstances. But I got 7 million inquiries from people with I have 1,000 guests and a $50 budget. And they all see it on TV, and you have to treat everybody with respect that calls, and you've got to vet all of this stuff. But it makes it very difficult to actually run a business. Going back to being a normal wedding planning business was a tough one. And I loved what he did, but they say God shuts a door and opens a window. Well, Hurricane Maria did that, because the way my business worked, we were booked a year and a half in advance all the time. And when we talked about, are we done with living on an island off the coast of another island, and our grandchildren are getting old enough that we wanted to be home and do things with them, what do we do? And the Hurricane Maria wiped out everything down there. People talk about where it hit in Puerto Rico first. It hit Vegas first. And they still don't have a hospital. They didn't have power for 17 months. Power and water are still as unreliable as ever.
So Sandy, you've gone down there. You've built a business that far exceeded even your expectations.
Yeah.
It took off. You got a contract or a deal with the TLC channel to film you for a year, and no doubt you're kind of at a peak. And then it sounds like you had some thoughts that maybe we should think about a shift in our career before the hurricane hit.
Vegas is a really special island, and I highly recommend vacations there. It's incredible. But like I said, the hospital was destroyed, and it wasn't much of a hospital. I mean, anything serious, you got medevaced.
And you couldn't have weddings, right?
Well, no, we had to cancel every wedding, 18 weddings.
Did you take a big financial hit on that?
Oh, yeah.
Or insurance?
The way that my business was structured, I didn't take a hit on the fees because I had another big payment coming from them that they would never pay. But I went back to all of my vendors to recoup deposits for my clients. And I had some vendors who wouldn't refund. And there were not the clauses that they really should have had in their contracts to do that. And because I have a reputation, I paid back those client deposits to the clients, But it wasn't an extraordinary amount. Like, it didn't put, you know what I mean? Like, I was really blessed because there were a lot of people who lived on the island who didn't have an option. We had a condo up in Montgomery County, Maryland that we'd kept because nobody wants us to visit for more than a week. So we need a place to stay when we come home. And we were
Well,
really lucky.
what a stressful time for you, for your business. Of course, a stressful time for your clients. These
Yep.
people want to get married, have
Well,
to
I
come to
had
other
to I had to
arrangements.
reevaluate because we had the opportunity to relaunch it in the Washington area,
Yeah,
and it's a incredible place for weddings, right? I know the area. If I'm going to transition, that would make sense. But I was tired. We had done more than 500 weddings in 11 years, and um, it's an exhausting job. It's just really, really
yeah,
tiring. It's
yeah, I bet.
emotional as well as and I wasn't ready to jump back into it, and I wanted a break. And it was just the Police Tribune, which was Blue Lives Matter back then, um, was hiring an editor, and I was just curious and reached out. And the timing, it was good. It was right as it was right after the hurricane, and we were reevaluating everything. And it turned out to be the most amazing job on the planet. I'm managing editor of the publication, but I get to write as much as I want because writing's what I love. And I wrote a book. I've got a book. It's still on Amazon. I still get the little royalty checks about
Yeah,
wedding planning.
right. I
And
have the
that's,
book. I have the book.
I can
Yeah.
write anything that you want me to write, but I actually enjoy covering news. My first news beat ever was as the police beat at Ohio State on the Lantern.
It's interesting that, if you had restarted your wedding business, I'm just thinking in 2020 you
COVID.
would have hit a pandemic and
Oh no,
COVID and
we've said
had
it
to
a
go through that a
hundred.
second time.
We've said it 100 times. Like, oh my god, because that was every bride I canceled sobbed. Some of the grooms
Yeah.
cried too. Every couple cried, and I cried with them because I was sad about their wedding, and I was sad that my home was gone. That was our primary residence.
Yeah.
And then after the storm, our house was fine as concrete, but we were looted and just bad stuff. It was the kind of thing that made you just say, I don't want to live there again.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
at least not right now. I would
Yeah.
vacation there in a heartbeat, but just, I was ready to be back home, and we had a lot of family up here. But I was just really lucky because I never stopped writing. I had a column for the Huffington Post, which always makes people laugh, but I had a column for them for like 6 years. And I wrote for Condé Nast for Brides Magazine. I did a ton of writing and the whole
Yeah.
time. My blogs were pretty prolific, but
Yeah.
and that was the crazy thing is I never did any paid advertising for my company other than on the local maps on our island because everything organically spread because of all my writing. And so I just took that energy and converted it. But it hasn't been a dull ride at the Police Tribune at all because, like I said, it was Blue Lives Matter when I was hired. Blue Lives Matter was founded in like 2014-15 by my bosses. I guess
Oh,
actually around Ferguson. And then it became a movement. And we had to rename the publication because it's an actual publication.
yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
it's it's straight news reporting, and
Sure.
it is all too confused with what the
Well,
name.
let me ask you a few questions about that. First of all, you mentioned covering the police beat at when you were at the Ohio State University.
Yes.
Uh, I understand they've just trademarked the word "the," so hopefully we won't have to pay a royalty for me saying that. But what was that like as a college undergraduate covering the police beat?
Well, Ohio State's like a small city. It's not a small city. It's a
Yeah,
normal sized city.
and the
Just the
school paper is a major paper.
Yeah, God, I'm trying to remember. It was like 48 pages daily. It was a real
Wow.
newspaper then.
Yeah.
Now it's
Yeah.
all online, but it was a real newspaper, and everybody grabbed a copy. And I got a couple of SPJ awards, like big ones for spot news
Great.
reporting and investigative journalism when I was there. One was I busted a contract steering ring because there was this lady. The fraternities kept getting in trouble, and sororities they get in trouble for drinking and parties, and they'd get referred to like the dean of whatever, and in the justice system there, and she would say, okay, well, you've got to go for alcohol awareness classes, or you were fighting with another fraternity, so you have to go for anger management classes, blah, 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 right? And they were just hemorrhaging tens of thousands of dollars a quarter for these classes. And it turned out that lady in the justice, she and her husband had just moved down from University of New Hampshire. And he started the company that ran all the classes. And the school didn't know they were
Incredible.
married.
But you got to the bottom of it.
I
Huh?
got to the bottom of it, and I broke it in a series of stories because it just kept getting weirder and weirder.
Well, now
That
I
was
know why. Now it's clear why we accepted you to our Institute on Journalism, because
You
you had that
guys
kind of success
waitlisted
as a.
me. You waitlisted me. Steve Hayes was like, he said, yeah, I got the letter that was like, you're under consideration, and you guys, that paragraph, it says, if there's anything else that you accomplish or you publish between now and when we make our decision, please send it to us. Well, I was the police beat reporter. I think I might have been campus editor that semester. So I just bombarded you guys, and it was a fax machine.
That's right.
And you guys accepted me and gave me a scholarship so I would stop.
Yeah, that explains why when I came in the morning, the paper was all piled on the floor behind the reception desk. So
Hey, I had to wait
those are
late to get access
your
to the
clips.
unfettered access to the fax machine to
Yeah.
send you stuff.
So now you've done this as a undergraduate covering the police beat, and now here you are, decades later, a few decades later, going back to this
Yeah.
area of journalism, law enforcement, and
Yep.
police, and kind of what I think you mentioned your husband was a retired police officer
Yeah.
in the D.C. area and on SWAT teams and all, but it's certainly become a major issue, the whole issue of the defund police movement, the respect for police or lack thereof. Uh, what are the kinds of things you do at the Police Tribune that you cover there?
We cover all of it, and I covered George Floyd from the very first moment through. I covered every day of the trial. Um, I also made time to watch the Johnny Depp trial, but we weren't covering that anyway. But no, I covered the Brooklyn Center shooting. She grabbed her gun instead of her taser. I've covered a lot of major ones right now. One of the big ones I'm covering is Akron and Jalen Walker,
Hmm.
and it's just a bad scene because they're investigating now to see what, if any, procedures the officers violated. And everybody's going, they shot him 60 times. They didn't obviously violate procedure because they've each got 17 rounds in their gun and 8 of them opened fire. Do the math. They didn't even completely unload. Yeah, he was on the ground when there were the last 2 shots. Yes, but they happened in like 0.2 of a second. Like, you just have to have perspective of, you always
Right.
hear about anybody who goes and does an active shooter type drill or goes to a police thing and learns how to do it, comes away with a totally different perspective of time, space, and
It
shooting.
does seem like in some of these stories, and of course I don't follow it nearly as closely as you do, but there's a narrative that comes out immediately afterwards, and it spreads very quickly. It gets even distorted, and then when an investigation is finally completed, and the facts come out, it's a very different story.
We
And
were talking about this the other day, how we used to see something on the news and they would say, and the police are investigating and we'll have more for you on that tomorrow. And we all said, okay, we're going to have more on that tomorrow. They need to investigate.
mhm.
And now the investigative tools are 1,000,000% better. My God, we have body cam, we have a video on every building, on every corner, every dash cam. But they still have to watch it, they still have to process it, they still have to investigate and determine what happened. And the problem is these narratives get spun up in a number of cases.
People
And I
people
mean,
don't want to wait, right? They want
no, they
immediate
don't.
information and answers.
Exactly. And I hate to use the George Floyd example because that was such a big one. But again, like, cities are burned when people get upset. In Buffalo a year ago, they had a shooting where there was a ton of violence afterwards. And it turned out it was nothing. There's cities where that happens all the time. It's not that it was nothing, somebody died, but the cops didn't hunt him down and kill him. And with Jayland Walker, the guy was shooting at them 40 seconds before he jumped out of a car wearing a black ski mask. Okay, even in the era of COVID, that's not normal. You're not driving at night in a black ski mask for no reason in July or June. I mean, that doesn't make sense. So, I
Mhm.
mean, nobody deserves to be shot 60 times. But it was his second police chase of the day. Earlier in the day, he'd fled police in New Franklin, which was an adjacent township, and they put the alert out. So Akron police went after him, same stolen car. He shot at police. When he dove out of the car in his mask, he left his gun in the car. There was no way for police to have known that. And when you watch the video, it's just lickety split. What's upsetting is any use of force is hard to watch. whether
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
shooting, whether it's people officers deploying tear gas, but watching somebody be shot is awful.
Now, is the audience for the Police Tribune? Is it mostly law enforcement officers, people in law
Mm-mm.
enforcement, or
It's more, I would say I mean, we have certainly a lot of law enforcement supporters. I think we have like 2.5 million followers on the Blue Lives Matter Facebook page, and we've transitioned. But it's a lot of law enforcement supporters. It's a lot of
okay?
conservatives. It's a lot of Republicans. It's a lot of people who want to know what's actually going on in news with the police. There's a lot of, and it's fun because you can tell how many people that are not pro police are on our pages because they argue in the comments, and then they're like, what do you even? But they're reading it because they know that we are reporting the facts.
Yeah.
Even when the police look bad, we report the facts, and we make the cops mad too. But there needs to be one resource that is, that it wasn't afraid to print the toxicology report from the George Floyd thing. You need publications that are going to show every aspect of what's going on, and I think that's why we've grown in popularity, and it's been a fun
Well,
experience.
we've certainly witnessed the last few years a spike in crime in major cities. I think we've seen a pullback to some extent of policing that's led to that. And obviously, it's not purely a conservative liberal issue, but it does often play out that way in many cities. Do you see us coming to a more reasonable position in terms of everyone recognizing there's an important need to have a strong and well trained police force in cities to
I think
and to use reasonable tools to try to reduce crime?
I think people realized defund the police was a bad idea. Like it has
Yeah.
find a single city where lowering police budgets, cutting personnel has been positive, effective. I mean, some of the cities where they haven't done that, but they've augmented by adding uh, people to go to emotional distress calls. Social workers, great, but the social workers don't want to go to these calls without police. You know,
Mhm.
so I think that the crime. I mean, you look at New York right now. It's it's a mess. Los Angeles, San Diego, they can't keep officers. Seattle, they're so far down, it's not even funny. And New York's literally having an exodus of detectives right now. So,
Yeah.
I mean, it's
That's
criminals are
yeah.
emboldened. And the problem is, they're making all these stupid rules like you can't chase anymore. You can't chase. It's like Chicago, and you can't.
Right.
And criminals are going to keep robbing people, and they're going to run, but the cops aren't allowed to chase them. Like, in what planet?
Some of that was the case in Chicago. Yeah, you're making a good point, and you also see in some big cities district attorneys who don't want to
They
prosecute, or
won't prosecute.
they've eliminated bail uh,
I,
for many
I
many
lost track
violent
of how
crimes.
many stories we covered of, especially on the West Coast, Portland, Seattle, like people who were assaulting, damaging, breaking, doing horrible things, and they're not facing the charges. They're not being held to account. Prosecutors aren't doing anything about it. But people are not completely crazy because look at Chesa Boudin in San Francisco. I mean, the district attorney, the George Soros funded district attorney whose parents were cop killers, he actually got recalled. He's getting
Right.
booted out in San Francisco, which means like maybe the world isn't going to completely come to an end. Maybe even in the most liberal city in the world, people were like, wait a minute, this is crazy. We can't even walk down the street anymore. I just don't want us to all have to become San Francisco.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's shift for a minute, Sandy. I'd like to give you the opportunity to offer advice to young people who are coming up after you. Let me first ask you a little bit about whether you have any thoughts about the future of journalism, because we've seen, I think, a drop off to some extent in young people who think journalism is a career they should pursue. That's partly because perhaps the media has become so splintered and the profession itself is not as prominent in some ways. But would you still recommend to people with that passion you have, the ability to write like you do, pursue careers in journalism?
Yeah, I think we need good journalists. We need educated journalists, and we need honest journalists. And the problem is that when I was taking ethics classes, when I went to the Wall Street Journal, all the paperwork we signed about what we couldn't do, and what you can't talk about, what you can't do, what it wouldn't be appropriate to do, and what you can't share. And these rules don't seem to apply anymore anywhere. I'm so horrified by what I'm seeing at the highest levels at major networks. It just doesn't seem like rules apply. And there used to be a time where there were commentators and there were news anchors. And now every news anchor thinks we want to know what their political opinion is, and I don't. And I think a lot of people feel that way, and that's why people end up leaning towards one of the channels that's more their political view, because they're all skewed, so you may as well go with one that won't really make you mad while you're listening. But there's just not as much straight reporting, and I really fear for journalism, because the whole fake news thing, well, anybody in the world right now who knows how to set up a website can become a journalist by tomorrow. Like, we all thought it was funny when Matt Drudge did it, right? But he was just taking everybody else's stories and putting them out there. And now this is a completely different world where people just start writing and it becomes fact. Remember when you had to have two sources? You don't have to do that anymore.
I know advice we were giving to students back when you attended our program was just along the lines of what you said, that you're 20 years old. People aren't interested in your opinions. What they want is for you to go out and find information for them that they can use. And now, hey, I can voice my opinion in 250 characters or less on Twitter, and I might get 25 people to like it. So they get the impression that their opinion is worth so much because they can tweet it out or put it on Instagram. So it is a different world.
It's a different world. I think that for somebody who's serious about wanting to be in journalism, I think your best bet is to go to a legitimate publication initially. I wasn't with the Wall Street Journal for that long, but it's still always going to be a benchmark on my resume. Shows that I had the credibility to, you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
I think that's really important for try and find a reputable publication or a network that will work with you and give you an opportunity when you're young, because you need to really try and learn from some journalists.
One of the things we're emphasizing in our program, Sandy, is the idea of courageous leadership, because it takes courage today to be a leader with the danger of being canceled for something opinion you have or for some arbitrary reason. Could you offer some advice to young people today about how to be a courageous leader?
I think you have to be brave now and, willing to step up for what you believe in. But I also think that it helps to educate yourself on the things that you believe in. You can make a much more compelling argument. You stand taller as a leader when you have the facts and the information to back up what you're saying, when you're not just spewing information or spewing things that you've picked up on Twitter. And there's a lot of that. And it is not surprising that the younger generation thinks that, everything that's on the internet is true. I know that they don't really, but you really have to peel away the layers of the onion with all of these things. And I think we need the leaders. They need to be brave, but they also need to be smart. We need smart young people who really understand what they're talking about.
So learn some things, take some economics.
Yeah.
Listen to your professor. Those lessons might be valuable in the future, right? I have to ask you, you mentioned something to me about something Professor Jack High had taught you in economics that I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
In the balance of trade discussion, but it comes back to remind me of the fact that we're living in times again of inflation that where I recall when I was a college student in the 70s and interest rates were high, inflation were high. Would you share that again about what Professor High was telling you and your classmates?
My roommates and I still joke about it. Dr. High was teaching balance of trade, and we'd been talking about how much money the U.S. gave to the French film industry at the time. And it was just
subsidies.
Right. And we were talking about all of this. And he was talking about why we do things and why we don't do things and what we were doing that was good and what was doing was bad. And I don't remember the specific example, but all my friends and I quote him all the time because he goes, they keep doing that. The only thing the dollar bill is going to be good for is rolling up and smoking. And our class just died laughing, but he was right. I mean, and it was, he found ways to explain really difficult, weighty economic topics in a way that made it fun, made sense, and still comes to mind when I see certain things. I'm like, oh, really? We think that's a good idea to do that? The only thing the dollar bill is going to be good for is smoking. So, Fun for American Studies has come back so many times in my life. The foundation that I got there, the friends that I made there, I still have so many friends, from so many different, not even necessarily my year, but people I met through it. And all I can say is if I hadn't had it, I can't imagine where I would be today. But the opportunities it gave me were unparalleled. And I strongly encourage everybody who goes through the programs to do as many of them as they can, stay connected, and make friends.
Well, I think that's a good note to bring this to a conclusion, Sandy. It's been a wonderful conversation with you. Congratulations on all the success, as well as the way you've overcome the hardships of being an entrepreneur and a leader. You keep going forward, and you're an example, a role model for young people in our program. Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you for listening to the Liberty and Leadership Podcast. Please don't forget to subscribe, download, like, or share the show on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you like this episode, I ask you to rate and review it. And if you have a comment or question for the show, please drop us an email at podcast@tfas.org. The Liberty and Leadership Podcast is produced at K Global Studios in Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Roger Ream, and until next time, show courage in things large and small.